There were a lot of things that I knew I was struggling with, but I thought that most of those struggles were because I had a bad character. If you have an app or you put your phone across the room, your brain's gonna feel forced to find the motivation in a way that's probably gonna be much more productive. If we feel empowered to lean into our differences, it makes us a unique individual. But when we are really just performing neurotypical life for everyone else, it's easy to forget who we are, and that feels terrible, and it really erodes our self-confidence over time.
Welcome back to Late Not Less, a podcast about navigating adulthood with ADHD. I'm your host, Devin 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 In this episode, we talk about Meredith's book, It All Makes Sense Now, and about the moment where everything clicked. Together, we explore the myths around motivation and deadlines, the cost of masking, and why working at the 11th hour isn't a character flaw, but a neurochemical reality. This episode is about learning to work with your brain instead of against it. Let's get into it. Is an ADHD coach, creator, and writer. She holds a BS in psychology and MBA. As a true multi-passionate adult with ADHD, Meredith has gained varied experience over the last 20 years working in employee training and development, as well as tackling several small businesses. Meredith prides herself in her ability to hold a supportive space for her clients and facilitate lasting connections in her community for ADHD adults. The Hummingbird Hive. Her book, It All Makes Sense Now, seeks to validate the challenges that exist with ADHD and provide empowering strategies for personal growth. All right, gang, welcome back to Late Not Less, a podcast on navigating adulthood with ADHD. I'm your host, Devin 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏
It's going pretty good, all things considered. I feel like I am kind of in that point of January where the momentum of the early part of the month where you're ready to go and, start making moves is starting to fade a little bit, but powering through and getting through it.
That's relatable. I think I'm in the same general boat as you. Do you have any resolutions that you started, or just any sort of affirmations that you're trying to take with you into this year?
Yeah, I feel like I don't really like to call them resolutions so much as I do like to identify a goal in kind of each domain of my life. So on the work side, I'm trying to move forward on a second book project. So very, very early stages, don't have a contract for that yet, but getting a proposal together and making the moves to make that happen is sort of the big goal of this year. I have personal goals that I really want to make sure I'm getting the most out of my everyday life and not ignoring those interests and hobbies that bring me joy, especially since we're living in some stressful times these days. So I have some kind of specific things there, but really focusing on not neglecting just doing things for the sake of doing things because they make me a happier person.
That's fair. I think everything that you've sort of outlined here is kind of evergreen. I tend to just lump that all into the general umbrella of self care. It's kind of easy to talk about doing these things, but it does take some conscious effort, and sometimes it requires you to actually put more safeguards in place, either to safeguard your time or to make sure that you actually are doing these things. And
Yeah.
you know, I was probably going to ask you about that over the course of this episode as well, because I have been reading your book. It all makes sense now. Enhance your ADHD brain to live a creative and colorful life. And I definitely want to hear about your experiences both with navigating ADHD in your life and sort of the conclusions that you reached as you were writing this book.
Awesome.
So it all makes sense. I've been reading that book. I'm about halfway through, and I think there's been some pretty relatable sort of takeaways, even going as early as the introduction. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about how you've navigated your experiences with ADHD. Because one of the first things you pointed out was that when you were younger, when you did have these mistakes that were due to that inattentiveness, there was a sort of feeling of shame, a concern around how your parents would react. And I think, especially for me, that was a pretty recurring theme because you didn't know exactly what was happening in your brain that was different from how other people were perceiving things. So you didn't know how to talk to it. I found myself sort of masking because I didn't know how to put those thoughts or feelings into words.
Yeah, I think that for most individuals with ADHD, it's hard to avoid a habit of masking developing in childhood. Even if the ADHD is identified young, I think that our differences are not understood by most. So we're going to put things in place to make sure we avoid having to have those feelings of shame hit us as frequently as they do.
I noticed that you had also mentioned that while you were filling out an eval for your child, you were seeing some similarities in the experiences that both of you had. What was it like, kind of, I don't know, having those feelings put into words, sort of for the first time? What was going through your head with kind of connecting those dots?
I felt like it was like someone just flipped lights on in an old house that I kind of knew a little bit about, but really hadn't seen clearly. It was really validating when I first started thinking that perhaps I had ADHD too. I had spent a lot of my life having conversations with people and like trying to explain things I was struggling with, or how I thought about things. And was always met with a lot of like, oh, why is that a problem for you? Or why do you think like that? So I'd always felt just kind of like a little bit odd and that very few people understood me. And when I started reading all of the diagnostic criteria and learning more about ADHD, I was like, this all makes so much more sense than any of the other things that had been suggested to me before, like anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder. All of those things had been maybes in my brain and from suggestions from other providers, but never diagnosed. But they didn't quite fit me. So reading the diagnostic criteria for ADHD and being like, wow, I check all of these boxes. It was really exciting at first to feel like I was getting a lot of answers.
That's awesome. I assume that you, from what you said, we're both part of the Diagnosed with ADHD as an Adult club. Did you have some sort of ideas or sort of pick up on some patterns previously? I know you're reading the evaluation, but I know personally I would have moments where I thought back to college or early, post-grad days and thinking, oh, okay, that might have been influenced by something else. And what was that like for you?
There were a lot of things that I knew I was struggling with, but I thought that most of those struggles were because I had a bad character, or I just wasn't motivated enough, or I just wasn't organized enough. I never heard the term executive functioning or any of that, even though I did major in psychology. So you'd think those terms would have come up at some point, but I didn't have a name for any of these things other than lazy or unmotivated or messy or disorganized. And to be able to understand that these are actual real struggles and they're brain based. And that there are strategies I can use that actually make more sense for my brain than all of the pushing through I was trying to do and just like trying to be a better person. It was really great to be able to look back at some of those negative experiences and being like, oh, that was because of this. And it wasn't because I just didn't care or I wasn't trying hard enough.
I think that's really important. And I think it's awesome that you're offering yourself space and encouraging others to do the same. I personally have also had that experience where educators, people that you work with, there is this assumption of laziness. And it's mostly because there's a misunderstanding. There's the thought process that they don't get to see. And in addition, if it's something that maybe you're unable to hyperfixate on, there's this assumption that you don't care about it when you're having trouble, sourcing the dopamine to complete the task or sourcing the dopamine long enough to complete the task. Especially when you don't have a near and present deadline. I find that the 11th hour, something else you mentioned in your book, I almost can never get anything done without having that sort of time sensitive pressure on it. Even with my own personal hobbies, I'll have something that I started within the last 5 years where I'm still working on it. There's no pressure to finish it. But at the same time, because there's no pressure to finish it, I'm going as slow and methodical as possible, because there's also this fear that I could make a mistake. So I'm still trying to figure out that balancing act between having that motivation misfire and actually just sticking through all the way to the point where everything else is falling by the wayside.
Yeah, it's really tough, I think, because, a lot of people with ADHD crave roles that they're a little bit more independent, that they can do things their way. But oftentimes that means we're entrepreneurs or we work from home, and those things can be really great for our brain. And there's areas where we really shine in those types of roles. But oftentimes that means we have less intuitive deadlines, or things feel a little bit less urgent, and we're having to be much more creative with how we find the dopamine to have the motivation to get going on things.
Definitely. I'm in corporate America. This is probably the biggest entrepreneurial space that I'm in. So a lot of my tasks for myself every week are just trying to figure out ways to source dopamine. I think the biggest thing that I've been able to do, especially because sometimes with the hyperfixation, I'm really bad at making myself move outside of like my morning workout, is that I will look at YouTube and try to come up with playlists that are all just either ambient music or just any sort of long format audio that I can listen to during my workday. And I find that if I have the right music playing in the background, might not notice the difference between 20 minutes going by and an hour. I think for folks in corporate America, or I guess anyone that has a job where maybe they don't have the same degree of flexibility to try and get dopamine from other sources, what do you recommend? I know that one of the big things that you mentioned was movement and the need to get some of that energy expressed, lest it build up and become kind of an issue.
Yeah, I think it's hard to give strategies that can apply to all domains. Some people are working from home, some people are in the office, but I really liked at my last corporate job asking people to meet me for a walking meeting. So if it is someone that's on my team that I know also likes to get outside and see the sun and something other than blank white walls, if we had a meeting on the calendar where we didn't need to be like super active taking notes, if we were brainstorming, I'd be like, hey, let's take this meeting for a walk, and we just walk around the building a couple times. And I feel like that helps a lot. I do think changing your workspace can help. So just getting up, maybe you go work in the cafeteria. If you work from home, getting up and working at a coffee shop, parking your car all the way at the end of the parking lot, so you're getting some of that vitamin D, and getting that kind of change of scenery helps a ton. I really like a walk after my lunch break when time allows me to take a full lunch break. I know that's not accessible to everybody, but if you do get an hour or even 45 minutes, eat your lunch and get outside and move, because I think it really helps change our perspective. And it also gives our brain just enough stimulation to start really processing and thinking about what we do want to do next. It gives our brain kind of that open space to decide what the next task is going to be. And I think that can be really valuable to kind of keeping the momentum going throughout a day.
And to your point, in the before time, so pre-quarantine, when I was expected to be in the office 5 days a week, if I had run into a wall where maybe I couldn't figure something out, I did find that taking a break, going for a walk, would help. And so depending on the employer, it might be going for a walk with a friend while we sort of talk through what I'm kind of facing at work. Or in another case, I was at an office where I was allowed to bring my new puppy in. And so I was able to take her for a walk while I thought this through. And to follow up, I would say once a week, if I have the opportunity to, we have a really awesome coffee shop. It's called 𝗠𝗲𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗏𝗂 Coffee. And it's 1 block over from where I live. So I will go over there and just change the scenery up for a couple hours. It's nice because you have fewer things around you that sort of reinforce, I guess, the fewer things around you from your normal environment that kind of remind you why you're there. And I will combine that with an app like Opal, which will actually lock me out of social media for 5 hours or something during my workday. And I think that's done a great deal for my mental health, one, but it also means that I don't catch myself doom scrolling in the middle of my workday because I don't have access to the app to begin with.
Yeah, I think that those types of apps are great because It is like such an ingrained habit for so many of us to get on our phone. Those apps, like social media apps, are definitely basically dopamine slot machines. They're designed for all humans to keep scrolling until they get that, reel that's really funny or they learn something. And, we think that we just need to keep going until we get that. But oftentimes we just get sucked in and we keep going and we're searching for that reward again. And so if you have an app or you put your phone across the room or whatever you do to not access those addictive apps during the day, your brain's going to kind of feel forced to find the motivation in a way that's probably going to be much more productive for you. So from music, from having an engaging conversation with a coworker, from walking around, because you don't have that easy option to try to feel good. And it really just kind of allows your brain, it feels uncomfortable at first, I think, for a lot of people that get these apps, but your brain gets better at thinking about what the options are if you can't just grab your phone easily.
Definitely. And different strategies work for different people. I know some people will use apps that maybe they lock you out of your apps, but it also desaturates the color, so those things appeal less. I think for me, the nice thing with Opal is since it grays out those apps on top of locking you out of them, it also has another secondary reminder of what you're supposed to be doing. Because now that I see that it's grayed out, it's like, okay, there's something else that's supposed to be happening here. Oh, right, I'm in the middle of this thing for work. My phone is down. And to your point, because of how conditioned we are, every now and then I might just turn my phone off. Maybe I want to take like a certification exam and I'm doing it, at home. Sometimes I'll just forget to turn my phone back on. So when I go back later to check it, there's this really weird feeling of seeing that your phone is off. It's just a depowered brick and not being able to do that sort of, at this point, muscle memory of just opening a social media app and just scrolling. I think especially in the attention economy, we do have to have more safeguards in place to make sure that we aren't expending a whole lot of mental energy and attention to other things that either don't help us with what we're trying to accomplish or, even at worst, actively take away from us, whether it's, maybe paying attention to the news a little too frequently. Because sometimes you have to have something that allows you to recharge, and sometimes just not checking your phone can work wonders.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's honestly the strategy that nobody wants to hear. But it really is so helpful when we create guardrails and boundaries around content consumption, because it's not just productivity related sometimes. Oftentimes, what we're consuming can be really dysregulating for our nervous system. So, especially now, we open our phone and we're faced with a lot of like really awful things to see. And then we're seeing it over and over and over again 10 times and feeling really powerless. And people with ADHD get dysregulated so much more easily than neurotypical people. So we have to then figure out how to regulate our emotions, get back into what we're doing. And that can feel impossible for a lot of people. So having things in place that allow you to stay informed, but not go down that rabbit hole over and over again and feel like you're constantly dysregulated is super important.
Definitely. And to add to your point, that's something that I have definitely struggled with before, sort of finding ways to keep myself out of my phone, was seeing things that did challenge my ability to stay regulated during my workday. And then knowing that nothing in my professional life is going to shift in the immediate all that much as a consequence of what I'm reading, but feeling a little bit at odds with knowing that these things are happening while everything is just business as usual at work. And so I still do try to remain plugged into the news. I still try to make sure that I'm, knowledgeable or staying up on current events, but trying to understand that there's a time and a place, and I can do that in community with other people versus going it alone while I'm in my home office during my workday. So trying to separate the two things.
Yeah, it's not one of those things that we can like look at in a really black and white way, because there's so much nuance to, like you said, staying informed, doing what you can, but also, like you said, your corporate job does not care that you are dysregulated by the news and thinking about this. And, they're just going to look at that as you're not good at compartmentalizing like the rest of their employees. And we all have to kind of keep living the everyday life that's in front of us among all of this. So finding what works for you. Like for me, I don't check my phone an hour before bed. So no social media. I'm usually reading at that time or hanging out with my kids. That's helped a lot. It was a really hard habit to break, but knowing what I need to like get a good night's sleep to feel ready for the next day. I do most of my news consumption right before my morning workout so that gives me an additional opportunity to process and think through these things. And it also has a natural end time because I'm usually scheduled for a class or something like that. So thinking about how that looks in your life, I think is really important in today's day and age.
Definitely. And something that I want to talk about because this is something that your book got me thinking about more. And it's early on, I think it's chapter 1 or 2, but talking about transition times, something that you'd mentioned was that it's not enough to leave when your phone or your GPS tells you to leave. So if something says that the drive is 15 minutes, you don't leave when you only have 15 minutes left. I do take that personally for what it's worth, because that is going to take some specific unlearning for me personally. And I think one of the things that you'd also mentioned was just coming up with ways to have these stops so that if you do need to pivot to something else, you're not, for lack of a better phrase, feeling violently disrupted when it's time to switch gears. Especially with my work, one of the things that I do like about working in software is that I do feel like these things are trying to solve a puzzle. And so when I'm solving puzzles, I have a really bad habit of acknowledging that here's a good stopping point because I always think, all right, well, what if I tried this? What if I tried that? And there's always one little thing that I can adjust or attempt. And as a consequence, sometimes I leave for appointments late. I might end up working 2 hours late when I didn't need to. And so I've been trying to think more about what I can do really to force myself to acknowledge when I'm at a good stopping point, to take advantage of those transition times and not feel as flustered, like I'm immediately rushing to something else. Because when I do that, I do find that I'm maybe more forgetful. Maybe, there's paperwork that I was supposed to bring with me for an appointment, but that's still back at home. I find that if I am not consciously preparing for something, I'm more prone to making mistakes. So I guess, how would you recommend, in my specific use case, right? Because I know that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but what are some good strategies to really think about how you can acknowledge when you are at a good point and not just 5 more minutes all the way down the road?
I think that it's really helpful to look at your day at the very beginning of the day. And if you have appointments or meetings or things like that, schedule in a transition routine about 10 or 15 minutes or whatever time works for you before that event. I'll give you like kind of an example that I've used in my life because I think that it's really just helpful to like think of these things in real world things and then we can see how that would apply to you. But I get hyper focused in the afternoons a lot. That's usually when I do more of my creative work. And like you said, it just feels so awful to break that hyper focus. I know a lot of times we, as people with ADHD, find ourselves in fields where we're solving puzzles, we're expressing ourselves creatively. And when we do get into that hyper focus, we just want to keep going and time just disappears around us. So if you know you have something that you need to break that focus for, schedule in some type of reminder to start a transition routine. And for me, my transition routine before I pick my kids up from school is my alarm goes off once, and it's like my warning alarm. So it's basically like, hey, find a stopping point. You're going to have to stop in 10 minutes. And then my second alarm is like my hard stop. So usually, if I'm already at a pretty good stopping point, I'll stop with the first alarm. And then I tend to like to get up out of my space. Actually, there's a spot I skipped. First, I like to write down where I'm going to start the next time. Because a lot of times we don't want to break our focus because it was already really hard for us to get started. And if we know like what we're coming back to in a really tangible way, it's a little more comfortable for our brain. So I'll write down where I'm stopping and where I want to start next, what the next task is, or where I'm just at in a chapter of a book or something like that. And then I will go do something physical around my house. So I'll go wash a couple of the dishes from lunch that are in the sink, or I'll transfer a load of laundry or whatever. There's always something to do in my house. So I don't have a hard time finding just like 10 minutes to like kind of putter around. And I think you can do that in the office as well. Like you could like, clean up your desk, or you could go down to like the water cooler and grab a drink or something like that to kind of just physically get you out of that space. And then you're ready to go. I think it's just so much easier for our brain to get in the car and go to that appointment, not distracted and not still thinking about what we wish we were working on, when we give ourselves some warning and space to work through it.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's useful. I am going to have to dabble with that, especially with the part around just kind of taking care of some of the more common household responsibilities. One thing that I've definitely identified with, and something that you've talked about in your book as well, is just how we source our dopamine. Something that you pointed out is that it's the anticipation of a reward and not the actual reward itself. And so something that I've worked through with a previous ADHD coach was talking about the idea of changing your mindset. Something that I've struggled with is that at some point, it just felt like maintenance to do things like vacuum or mop or clean the kitchen. And at some point after getting into consulting, just because of feeling like there's always more that I need to do or feeling like I need to perpetually get caught up, those things started feeling more negative in my mind. It was less, well, this is going to be cleaner and I'm going to feel better about it, to, oh, well, that needs taken care of and you're going to feel worse for not doing it sooner. Mm-hmm. And so my task for myself is probably putting some of these things on my calendar so I can do them proactively so I don't feel like they're building up. My wife is also in consulting. She's at a different firm, and I think we both have our busy seasons. They usually tend to wax and wane at separate timelines, but she's a little bit busier right now and I'm a little bit busier. And I think this would allow me to tackle some of these things in a proactive manner that would also rob me of the ability to feel guilty if she jumps on them before I do.
Yeah, it's almost like finding that whatever that flexible structure is for both of you, like having that time block in your day, when you're transitioning in and out of work, where you're like, okay, I'm going to go do a couple of things. Maybe it's not just like I'm specifically going to do laundry at this moment. I'm going to look around and see what hasn't been done yet, because, I think in most households, the things are never ending. So thinking of it more as like that little bit of maintenance and knowing you only have to do it for 10 or 15 minutes, I think is also helpful. When we look at, I know for me, I absolutely hate cleaning. I hate housework. It is like, if I could hire someone to do all of those things for me, that would be the first thing I would outsource. I would work more hours to do less home care. It is not my favorite. And so I think, though, like you said, changing your mindset around that too is like, this is going to feel good to have this little bit done. This is going to feel good that these things aren't piling up. Going to feel good that people can stop by and I'm not feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm scrambling. I think that getting to why this is actually something that should be done and helpful for you is really great. And then you can also start letting go of the things that maybe don't really need your time and attention. Like, I don't make my bed every day. Like, that's not overly important to me, and nobody sees that. And, it doesn't impact anybody's life negatively for not being done. So thinking about the things you want to do to feel good in your home versus the things you should do. And then just having some time periods in your day where you're just doing a little bit of that is so much easier for our ADHD brain than being like, I'm going to clean all day Sunday. Nobody's going to look forward to that. Nobody's going to be excited. It's going to be really hard to initiate that when it feels so big.
Yeah, that you're completely right. I'm the kind of person where I don't mind doing laundry, but my biggest hurdle is folding. Running everything through the washer and dryer is fine. And once I feel like there's enough clothes, then my brain starts looking at it as more of a hurdle. Whereas if I do it bit by bit, there's less of a struggle there. So I think you might be onto something there, Meredith. I think that's something that I'm going to have to take offline and work jargon. Sorry. Something that I'm going to have to reconsider after this episode and just change how I get those things on my radar.
Yeah. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I also wanted to talk about was just in the range of hyperactivity. So still pretty early on in the book. One of the things that's been a pretty consistent through line on this show with women guests is that the idiosyncrasies that are usually associated with hyperactivity are often dismissed or ignored because they either manifest differently for boys, usually because of social structure. And I was wondering if there were certain things that you noticed that were probably still more similarly tied to ADHD that might fly under the radar in women.
Yeah, I think that hyperactivity is so complicated for ADHD women. Oftentimes, I think women are diagnosed as predominantly inattentive when they have more hyperactivity than they think or their provider thinks. Some ways I think it shows up commonly are talking a lot, talking fast. I was nicknamed Meredith the Mouth in elementary school because I talked so much. There's that fidgeting that I think even shows up differently with girls. Oftentimes we think of like fidgeting in that sort of just like moving all the time, can't stay in a chair. But oftentimes we're like secretly bouncing our leg under the chair so no one sees it, or we're twirling our hair a lot. Like I was always playing with my hair as a kid. As an adult, I'm like drinking my water all the time in meetings. Like if you watched a recording of me in a Zoom that I wasn't facilitating, I've got my coffee, I got my water. I'm just like constantly changing positions. So we find ways, I think, early on to like have that physical hyperactivity to look a little bit more socially acceptable to others. And then I also just think there's our busyness. Oftentimes it's like we're the kids that people say need to learn to be bored. Like we struggle with boredom. So we're constantly wanting to do an activity. We've got like 5 craft projects all over the house. We're kind of all over the place with weekends are hard, I think, for a lot of ADHD kids if there's not a lot planned. I see this all the time with my daughter. She's got such a busy schedule as a teenager, but the second anything slows down, she's like got a new hobby or she's like trying to find somebody to hang out with. And I was that kid too, where like I planned all the social events for my whole friend group on the weekend because I really like wanted to, and I knew I needed to be busy. But at the same time, that also showed up as like, oh, maybe my friends don't like me as much as I like them because I'm always initiating everything. So it's all very complicated. I think there's also an internal hyperactivity that happens with people with ADHD, not just women. But I think our brains are just bouncing around with different ideas a lot of the time. We've got like kind of that racing mind when we're trying to go to sleep. Like even just last night, I was like so tired all day. And when it was time to go to bed, closed my eyes, put on my, sleep music that I use every night. And immediately I closed my eyes and I was like, oh, I got to order this thing for my kid tomorrow. I might have already missed the deadline. I started feeling all this shame about maybe forgetting. And I stopped myself and said, hey, open your phone, put it as a task on your calendar tomorrow, and then you can know that you're not going to forget. So it's stuff like that that I think is missed often in girls, especially because of, like you said, those social structures, the messages we're receiving. It's a little more acceptable to be a little boy that has a ton of energy. You just put him in a bunch of sports, and people usually deal with it a little bit differently. So girls really figure out early on, like, I've got these things going on. I'm different. How do I look a little less different? And how do I cover these things up a little bit?
Thank you for sharing. I feel like this is always worth discussing. And I want to make sure that if someone listens to this episode versus the last episode versus the next episode, that we're still covering things because it's a journey. I was diagnosed at 32. And it was only when I was looking at getting a diagnosis that I started thinking about these things. And it was only after getting the diagnosis that I started thinking about my relationship with myself and my relationship to other people, because this informs a lot of who I am and how I kind of go about my day.
Yeah, I think ADHD really impacts everything, not just our productivity and motivation, but how we show up in relationships, how we feel internally. It affects a lot of areas of our life, if not all.
Mm-hmm. And something that you were talking about earlier that I'm still working on and doing in my own life is holding space for those differences and not feeling like you're too much. Because even if people don't explicitly say you're too much, you will still have these moments, whether as an adult or as a child, where you feel you will need to be more restrained around people because there's just something about you that isn't being understood.
Yeah, I think that it is hard to carry that. I definitely was I think I'm too much, so let me like massively overcorrect in my 20s. And at times I started feeling like I forgot who I was, because a lot of those qualities that we're trying to cover up are actually really great qualities. If we feel empowered to lean into our differences, it makes us a unique individual. But when we are really just performing neurotypical life for everyone else, it's easy to forget who we are, and that feels terrible, and it really, like, I think erodes our self-confidence over time.
It does. And to piggyback off the comment you made a moment ago, it does affect other areas of your life. Something that I learned in my 20s by meeting a person who was categorically a good fit for me and I'm now married to, was this idea that because you were too much, that it feels unrealistic to have certain desires for things you want in a partner, whether it's common interests. Well, I mean, for me, it's going to be common interests, but that at the same time, kind of muting those sort of aspects of yourself that you think aren't gelling with the person that you were then dating. And to, like you said, becoming less of who you are. And luckily, those things are just loud enough on me that the equalizer starts to rebalance after a while. But then even talking to other friends, and because I have the gift of hindsight, being able to tell people that you don't need to make excuses for other people to treat you short of what you actually deserve. And I think that's probably something that folks with ADHD need to take some time to think through and reflect on.
Yeah, I really do think that who we're in relationships with, who we're friends with, that's a choice. So if we are around people that really are making us feel like we're less and too much, then maybe those aren't the right people for us. I mean, I do think it's important to be self-reflective. I don't think masking is something we should never ever do. I do try not to interrupt my friends as much as I probably would if I was completely unrestrained in a conversation. I do try to let other people be the main character every once in a while, or as much as I focus on me, I try to be very interested. And I think that's something we naturally are as ADHDers. We're interested in other people, so that doesn't feel as fake. But I do find that there are people that are just not going to be my people. I met my husband. I've been married almost 21 years, which feels insane to me. Like, it's just absurd at this point. But I met my husband pretty young, in my early 20s, and he's my exact opposite. He is very, like, he follows the schedule. Like, he just does the things that need to be done. He doesn't have to, like, find 27 strategies to do a dish and vacuum the rug. It's just, I'm so envious of it. But he liked what I brought into our relationship was, let's go do something fun. He liked the spontaneity. He wanted all of that. But because I was so young when we were together, I was like, oh, I got to be more like him. I got to fit this mold of, like, my perfect corporate husband that shows up and is reliable, and I need to be more like that, when he wasn't telling me that. I was telling myself that. So sometimes I do think we have to really slow down enough to, like, be reflective of, is this person actually thinking this about me? Are they actually telling me this? Or is this just a buildup of all those negative stories in our brain, and we're just reacting to people just operating differently than us? And I think that's important to make that distinction sometimes, because I think that when we get into that habit of, like, assuming other people's feelings or intent about us, it really can be a slippery slope and damaging in the context of relationships.
I think 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said something like, well, of course. But with, things like work stress or personal life or family emergencies, things that are always happening, when you don't realize that you need to secure time for yourself, that kind of wears on you. And when you become kind of burned out, you kind of notice that you're detaching away from people, either because you're worried about sharing that burnout or that grief, for lack of a better phrase, with other people. And so I found myself kind of wondering similar things about my relationship with my partner. And I've luckily been able to remind myself, especially in the last couple of years, of, well, no, your partner actually likes these things about you. So when you show up with an Instagram post after work about a $15 California burrito that's 2 feet long, and you're pitching it like half as a joke, but half seriously as a date night, that's a thing that she actually likes about you. And I think the creative element for ADHDers, I think that for some of us, we need to remind ourselves that if we're with someone who likes us for who we are, 9 times out of 10, they really do appreciate those things.
Yeah, they usually do more than we give them credit for. Oftentimes, I think that our own insecurities show up as, projecting onto other people that they don't like that thing about us. But really, we just need to build that like inner confidence that the person that we are is a good person to be.
Absolutely. And I think tying into hyperfixation and hyperactivity, one thing that I've noticed for myself is that my ability to sort of resist impulsive behavior sort of wanes as I become increasingly fatigued. I tend to do like keto for the first month of the year, specifically because I try to rewire my brain in terms of how much sugar it craves on a regular basis. Just because I've noticed, especially in the last few years, that I tend to consume more sugar or just consume more in general as like a quick fix for dopamine. And it becomes mindless. And I will catch myself, a couple months into it thinking, oh, okay, maybe you're not hungry. You want to eat something, but you're not hungry at all. And that was definitely something that I wanted to talk to you about, especially knowing that when I used to self-medicate before diagnosis, it was just gratuitous amounts of coffee to the point where I would get withdrawals that would be so bad that I would have to go sleep it off for like 14 hours. And one of the things that I would like to talk about is figuring out if there are ways in our lives that we can sort of do a proactive assessment around like how tired we are, just different mechanisms we can have in place in our lives to try and prevent getting to a point where we have to think more consciously about curbing like impulsive behavior, something that helps us build that resilience so that we can kind of just push back a little bit.
Yeah, it's really hard because so many of us like just don't have that built-in pause. Physiologically, our defenses are definitely down. Those executive functions get worse the more tired we are. So I think that really finding ways to check in with ourselves and create that pause when it's not there naturally is really helpful. And having a framework when we do create that pause to ask ourselves a few quick questions, whether that's how tired am I? Am I tired or am I hungry? Like the simpler, the better, I think is helpful. For me, it's sugar and shopping that get me when I'm really, really tired. I've been doing great in January, not, doing online shopping. I'm really, really trying to cut back because I don't need all this stuff. And I hate looking at the stuff in my house. But yesterday I was exhausted and I found myself in my phone. But what I've done is I've disabled Apple Pay and I don't save my credit card on any of my favorite stores sites so that if I want to buy something, I have to go get up and find my purse, which probably I'm not doing when I'm tired. And it gives me that like just barrier that I have to be like, okay. And I've kind of trained my brain to be like, what do I really want right now? What do I really need right now? And maybe it's rest. Maybe it's to go pick up my book. Maybe it's to call a friend and have a fun conversation or something. But allowing for that question of like, is this really what I need? Or am I like really just exhausted and my body's just trying to find ways for energy so it can keep going when really I need to take the break and like lay down for 20 minutes or whatever it is that rejuvenates you.
I appreciate the advice there. I find that I'm hit or miss when it comes to spending impulsivity. Sometimes it's like, oh, well, it's just a couple bucks, no big deal. But other times, to your point, one of the things I'll ask myself is, if you wait 2 weeks, 4 weeks, et cetera, are you still going to want this thing? And so sometimes I'll end up coming back to something because I've given it thought. And other times it just kind of falls out of my fingers or it sells out. And I go, well, the decision's been made for me.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, not all shopping is bad, but it's that I want to know that I was grounded in that decision. So it feels much better to have that thing arrive at your house when you did wait a little bit. And maybe, 2 weeks sounds like a lifetime to me. For me, it might just need to be 24 hours. But I'm with you on that, where like oftentimes we're like, okay, like I need it now. I also think there's a lot of dopamine for people that kind of fall into that shopping habit. It's not just the purchase, it's the like waiting for it to show up. The like, oh, is this going to be as good in person as I think it's going to be? Like the excitement. Mm-hmm. And then I can't tell you how many times that item has shown up and I opened the box and I looked at it and I like didn't even try it on. And it's like, it's embarrassing to say that. And I used to feel all this shame about it because I'm like, why am I so careless with money? Why am I just throwing money away? But like, I was getting the dopamine from anticipating the reward of like, oh, is this going to be like the perfect new sweater or whatever it is? So I think knowing that is helpful, and knowing like, oh, maybe I just need something to look forward to. Maybe that's what I'm really seeking. Maybe for me, I really enjoy social connection. I'm a very like outgoing person. I love seeing my friends. So maybe instead of ordering a sweater, I text my friend group and say, hey, do you want to meet, for brunch next Sunday? So I have that to look forward to. So really thinking about like, what is it I really need and what do I really want in this moment is helpful. The hard part with ADHD is we don't intuitively do that. So we have to sometimes create barriers for those things that are our go-tos. So it can look like physical barriers if it's sugar. Maybe the sugar gets stored in a cabinet with like a hair tie over it. So like even just having to go take that extra step is enough that like slows your brain down to ask that question.
All right, definitely have to try that with other food items going forward. There was an app, and this isn't terribly useful for readers now, or listeners, sorry, but there was an app that you would be able to use for things like intermittent fasting. And sure, the timer that lets you know how much time you have left is just fine. But the feature that they've since removed, which was my entire reason for using the app, is that you could log what you were feeling when you wanted to. So you could at least try to identify trends. So let's say your cutoff time for eating is 8 p.m. and your start time is 10 a.m. If you were hankering for something at 9:30, you can think through, do you want this because you're hungry? Do you want this because you just feel the need to chew on something? And there was like a variety of different things you could use to describe the way that you felt when you were in that fasting window. And I've been trying to find something similar, because sometimes you want to understand the thing that's driving the behavior rather than the behavior itself. And I think, again, talking about just impulsive behavior is super helpful because we're trying to understand at the very bare bones of it all, what feeling are we trying to go with? And in some cases, especially with ADHD, you just need the dopamine.
I think our brains are just seeking that all the time. And so finding ways to get that dopamine from sources that give us a little less dopamine than the ones that give it to us like quick and easy is really important. I don't want to get too like granular in the science, but things like sugar, alcohol, nicotine, some drugs, they just like dump the dopamine in our brain. And so it sort of like resets our brain's like baseline for how much dopamine it wants at any given time. But the dopamine we get from solving a puzzle, from kind of working on a goal and the process of getting there, that's going to bring dopamine too. And that's going to be like in kind of doses that just help us feel motivated in all areas of our life, not just in that moment. And it's easier to go for that slower dopamine when we're rested, when we're not exhausted, when we are like kind of putting all the self-care puzzle pieces together. So if we're in a phase where we're like, wow, I have like just been hitting the sugar all the time, what's really going on here? Am I not getting enough sleep? Am I not connecting with my community enough? Like, what is it that I need to do to not feel like this depleted at the end of the day or middle of the day or whenever you hit those crashes?
Yeah, I think sleep for me has, especially in recent years, been the biggest hurdle. I was talking to a doctor about it last year, just in terms of like wanting to lower my cortisol levels. It's like, well, these things would improve with sleep. Fair enough.
Easier said than done.
Exactly. It's been a few weeks, so I've been very fortunate, but it's usually commonplace that at least one day during the work week, I wake up at anywhere between midnight and 3, and then I'm just up until my alarm goes off. And it does make it harder to get quality rest when you have a full work day, or let's say you decide to use that lunch break to try and take a nap. And so maybe you're asleep for all of 20 minutes out of that full hour. It does make it harder to manage things like impulse control when you've got that sleep debt that is slowly building up in the background.
Yeah, I think sleep is one of the most difficult things for ADHD because good sleep absolutely improves your symptoms and your ability to manage them. But so many of us, sleep disorders are actually really common for people with ADHD. A lot of people have delayed sleep phase syndrome, which is basically a kind of delayed circadian rhythm. So like we're not tired at the time corporate America thinks we should be tired in order to get 8 hours of sleep and, online by 8 o'clock in the morning. So it is really difficult sometimes. It's a hard thing to tackle for a lot of people. So I don't think we can ever just be like, just get more sleep. And it's like, okay, yeah, we all know that we want to do that.
Yeah, it's like the just try harder.
But how do we think about all of these, things contributing to that? And I'm like you, where I really have to do a lot to get decent sleep. Like it's honestly so annoying. Like the amount of things that go into me having a ghost of a chance of sleeping well. But it is definitely the number one thing that when it's working well, I have better days. And I usually, like you, I do have that 3 a.m. wake up and my brain is, just like on fire at that point. But if that's only happening once a week, I feel like I'm okay, right? Like, and I'm only hitting the sugar once a week, or I'm having a bad day once a week. I feel like I'm doing pretty good. So oftentimes I think like when that happens, I try not to like go into that spiral of anxiety that like tomorrow's going to be terrible. It's going to be an off day. And then I think that the more like dysregulated we get by thinking about how things are going to be harder, then it just like keeps impacting our sleep night after night. So if we can like shoot for good enough, like I shoot for like a B in sleep. I wish I could get an A, but like I'm not going to be an A student when it comes to sleep. I think oftentimes we're so all or nothing about how we approach things. So we're like, I'm a bad sleeper. I'm just not going to try. I've tried all the things. And maybe we have tried all the things, but if we haven't found like something that's even a marginal impact will help a little bit if we focus on that.
Yeah, I have found that depending on the week, certain sleep aids are more helpful. I always try to go with, if there's any sort of medication, non-habit forming, because if anything happens and you're without it, you're just immediately wrecked. There's a soothing bedtime caramel. There's no caramel in it, but it's a tea by Yogi. I think it has passion flower in it. So I'll drink that. I'll take maybe that sleep aid, but then zinc magnesium aspartate. I've got a sleep mask. I've got some ambient music that I play at a level that's so quiet that I almost don't hear it if I wake up in the middle of the night. And then both Sam and myself, we both have ADHD and a touch of the insomnia. So every so often we'll both wake up, roll over, and the other person's already up. It's 2 a.m, and we'll check in and see how the other person's doing.
Yeah, see, my husband can sleep through anything. I have the opposite of that. I literally have timed him before. He can hit the pillow and be snoring within 30 seconds. And I'm so, so jealous of that. But I do like that, like if you have that partner that you can just say out loud, oh, this sucks, we're both up. Like sometimes just like getting that out of your brain and into the world can help like, you reinitiate. I also have a quite extensive sleep routine, love magnesium as well. I put in earplugs with ambient music that I'm pretty dependent on at this point. If they are not charged, I'm going to be in trouble for at least the first hour of the night. But I also think like the more you can be in a routine and going to bed around the same time, the no screens was absolutely the hardest thing for me to break in the hour before I'm going to bed. But I mean, not just the light in the eyes type thing, but like the not checking my email and my notifications for an hour before bed has been great, because there were so many times when like I'm ready to go to bed and I check an email and I'm like, oh, now I'm thinking about this work thing, and like thinking about not just like the actual like bedtime routine, but like what kind of mental state do you want to be in the hour before bedtime, I think can help go a long way to reducing some of those like wake ups in the middle of the night feeling anxious and things like that.
Well, to throw another wrench in that, it's something that I struggle with as well is this concept of revenge procrastination. This idea that you didn't have enough time during your day to do something that you wanted to, or something very specific. So you sort of take it out on yourself by staying up late. I think I worked until after 8 o'clock, like last Friday, for example. And then Saturday morning was like, I probably should have gone to bed on time. I'm so sleepy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough when you feel like you owe it to yourself to do this thing versus I should probably just get some sleep.
Yeah, I always ask myself, like, what's going to be the cost of staying up and doing this right now? Do I want to pay that cost? And maybe on a Friday night, if you don't have a lot planned on Saturday, maybe that's an okay cost. But the revenge bedtime procrastination, I see it all the time. I work with a lot of clients that are parents. So like they leave work and then they're in kid life. And by the time the kids are in bed, they're like, I just want some me time and I deserve it. I'm trying to do this self-care. So it is really, really hard. And I've definitely been there so many times. My kids are older now. So some nights I am able to really stick. Most nights I can stick to that hour of unwind time, but there's definitely so many contributing factors, I think. And we're going to go through seasons of life where like those things are harder or easier. One thing that I've found that helps me with the revenge bedtime procrastination piece is being super intentional about building in time for my hobbies in my day. Like I start every morning, I think I mentioned this earlier, I exercise in the morning, and I actually am one of those people that has grown to really treasure that and love it. I'm usually, I hate saying that. I was not an athlete as a child, but I discovered running in my early 20s and I was like, wow, this is so my brain is different. And I had no idea I had ADHD, but checks out now that I was able to draw that relationship. But I'm usually training for a race. So I don't always want to get up and go for the run, but I'm like, oh, this is for me. This is something that I'm doing because I want to do it, not because I really need to. And I think that helps a ton. I also am participating in a reading challenge this year. And so I try to block out at least an hour a day where I'm going to read. I've always been a huge reader. So it's like, if I've found that time already and dedicated myself to not saying, oh, I'm going to relax and do something for myself, after the billion housework tasks are done, if I treat that as a huge priority in my life, I'm less likely to be okay, I'm going to stay up late reading till 3 a.m. because I know I get to do it again the next day because there's already time, fit into my schedule for the things I care about.
And I think that was just enough of an outlier for me, just because there was some important stuff going on at work and I was in and out of meetings. So I was fortunate that I was able to get to the gym before work started. I tend to consider that the bare minimum. But then I was at my desk for 12 and a half hours. So then getting away from my desk and going, oh, I need to do something that isn't just going to sleep. But then I also had booked an 8 a.m. boxing class the following morning. So I'm going to bed at 11:30 and waking up at 6 and immediately thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
It's hard because it's okay, we're supposed to be getting to sleep, but then, I get up at 5:30 or 6 to work out. So that makes it hard. And I do get that anxiety if my son's in sports now. So if we have a late practice, I'm like, oh, but I got to wake up early. And knowing what should be the biggest priority is not sometimes really isn't a great answer for that. But I do think it is tuning into your body and being you know what, maybe tomorrow was the day that I skip the boxing class and focus on the sleep and then feel confident that that's okay, that you're still kind of working in your best interest. I think that doing those self-evaluations in those moments when there are extenuating circumstances, because I don't think there's very many people these days that don't have all these demands on their life. Most of us have full-time jobs and some of us have kids and other responsibilities and pets and parents and all of these other things we're trying to do. And it does feel really hard to find that time to meet our own needs. So thinking about what you're going to get the most bang for your buck with, I think is really helpful.
I think that's important, especially in times like these. I'm not sure about you, but post-quarantine, I've had the flexibility to work remote. We have an office here in town, but I would say 90% of the time I am here in my home office. And even though I am getting the time back in the form of not having to do a commute, that time ends up getting replaced. So I don't really feel like I have gotten that much more time by comparison. Because, for example, it's okay, well, if I am starting my workday at 8 or at 7:30, that means maybe instead of having to prepare myself to go into the office, maybe I get a little bit more sleep because my brain really needed it. And then I can go to the gym and then go to work and then, take a shower where I have an opening. And then on the same flip side, I work later because I don't have to worry about a commute. And so it is interesting being in an era where I should, in theory, have more time, but it doesn't necessarily translate.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to sometimes too think about what routine fits me best. If I have that flexibility, I think oftentimes we just are in kind of that reactive mode of oh, I don't have to commute, so I can work longer. But thinking about oh, maybe I really don't need to. Maybe I do need to act as if I have a commute and that there is a stop time to my workday. I think that if we don't have boundaries for our time, it's even harder for us to initiate into tasks. So if you are like, well, you're not usually actively like thinking this thought, but oftentimes with people with ADHD, they struggle with getting into tasks and work, especially if they're self-directed and working from home. They're like, oh, I'll just make up for it and work later, and if we're like, nope, I want to stop at 6 or I want to stop at 5 because I have this like time blocked out for myself, sometimes it can create that motivation to get into things sooner and get, things wrapped up. I definitely feel like I miss the like, okay, it's time to leave the office now. Like having the clarity was, I think, helpful for a lot of people. So we have to think about now that we're working from home, if we are, what that really means for how we approach things. Because just because we don't have to commute home doesn't mean we need to be working until 10 o'clock at night, unless something's on fire or there's like a really important deadline or something like that. And if we're doing that every day, then maybe we're like, we need to talk to our boss about, what the expectations are, and if we're okay with that. So thinking about, we had these natural boundaries before, we had this kind of like natural deadline for the day to end, and now we don't. So thinking about how we can create that for ourselves can help a lot.
Yeah, I think similar to deadlines, if you do have a hard stop at a certain time, maybe you have to jump into another meeting, or maybe you absolutely are telling yourself you're going to be done after this time. I have found, especially recently, that does help. And if I'm worried about working later because maybe I felt like I've gotten a little unfocused during my day, I find that it also helps to have focus if I have those safeguards in place. If I know that in my brain I need to have either this thing done or I need to have a status report for it done by this time, that helps. I think that having the right motivation can help with a lot of different things, which I think does bring me to probably the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about in this episode, and it's the motivation malfunctions. I think for myself personally, I tend to lean more into gamification. So if I can think of any activity as like building a stat, that's something that I can more naturally tap into. That's the reason why it's easier for me to go to the gym with quote unquote discipline as compared to motivation, is because I just think about it as like building stats. But how can some of our listeners, even not necessarily having specific things to motivate themselves towards, but even just start thinking about ways to seek out that motivation? Like to your point, if you're trying to get into running, maybe signing up for a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon or a full marathon, but definitely not an ultra. That's too many.
Yeah, we don't need to go that far. I think that it always starts with identifying the outcome you're looking for. So sometimes we don't know what that outcome is, and it can be even more unclear when we're not working for ourselves, when we're working for a corporate entity. So maybe that outcome is, I want to have time to myself in the evening, or I want more of a work-life balance. So that's like the big goal, right? And then we need to break it down to like the actionable steps so that we know our path, because a lot of procrastination isn't just because we don't have motivation, it's that we can't see the way to get where we're going.
I'll co-sign that.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's not even like, oh, we're not motivated. It's like, we just don't even know how to get there. So making sure that is clear is really helpful. And then I like to talk about motivation as like kind of the building momentum. For people without ADHD, oftentimes just doing a task is gratifying. Like unloading the dishwasher and seeing it's done, they get like a feeling of reward from that. And we don't get as much of that. So we might get a little bit of like, okay, I'm glad that's done, I don't have to think about it again. But like our brain processes any dopamine we get from a reward much more quickly. So it's going to take us longer to get into things because we're not like going to be that excited when that thing is over. So I always say to start with the low-hanging fruit in terms of the tasks that you have in front of you, so that you can get into something that's a little bit easier to initiate. So if you do a task that's like, doesn't feel like really like distasteful to you or confusing or hard on your brain, do the smaller tasks, because we're not going to get as much dopamine by checking it off, but we are going to build confidence that we can start. So So start that thing, think about what the next hardest thing is, and then try to get into that role. And usually that will get you going. Starting is the hardest part. So start something that feels accessible to you. It's almost like that metaphor of like pushing a boulder, like getting the boulder going is going to be the hardest part of all. So, if you are looking at the things in front of you, like don't go for the heaviest boulder, like maybe go for like a lighter boulder, it's going to be easier to move. And then that will prepare you, train you to be able to do the heavier boulder that's ahead of you in your day.
That's awesome. I think there's certain areas that is still going to be absolutely applicable in my life personally. You were definitely preaching to the choir when you mentioned that if the knowledge needed to get started or the details around that are unclear, then it's difficult. And I know for me, there'll be things that either I want to do as a hobby or things that I want to do for like personal or professional development. And if the starting point feels unclear, it feels very similar to decision paralysis, where it feels like there's too much that's nebulous or vague going on for you to commit in any specific direction. So I think kind of coming up with a plan, and if that involves, like, if you want to learn a new skill, maybe you need to track down someone who can teach you that new skill. I think that it helps to try to put some guardrails on it. So I think for those areas of my life that are a little unclear, I think I'm going to definitely take a page out of your book on this one, Meredith. Thank you.
Awesome.
So I think that marks the end of this episode. Meredith, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram primarily right now. My handle is hummingbird_ADHD. If you prefer longer form content, I do write on Substack as well. And my Substack page is called It All Makes Sense Now, ADHD Insights. So that's where you're going to find any reel or thought I'm posting on Instagram. I'll be expanding upon it over on Substack. So those are the primary places. I pop into other platforms here and there. So you can probably find me just about anywhere, but those are the two areas I'm most active.
Awesome. Well, if I know the sphere that is ADHD, there's a chance that some of these listeners are already following you. So hopefully that'll just remind them to try and check a little bit more often, since I know the algorithm does force different people's work in and out of the limelight.
Yeah, hopefully, this is a good reminder that I still exist. If you forgot about me, I'm not mad. Just come back and like a few things and you'll get back into the algorithm.
Exactly. Meredith, thank you so much for being available today.
This was great. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. With that, listeners, I hope you have a great rest of your week. My name is Devin Rogers, and again, this is Late, Not Less. Thanks for watching. Here are some more conversations you might enjoy. And don't forget to subscribe for weekly content on ADHD, neurodiversity, and radical acceptance. And remember, just because you're late doesn't mean less.